For today's whiteboard station, we're going to be doing the whiteboards through videos. And so the first question I have for you is, what is 54% of 100? And we have two different methods that we've been using. Method number one is the percent proportion. So we put percent over 100 equals our part over our whole. Method number two is the decimal method. That's where we make our percent into a decimal, and we know that of means multiply and is means equal, and we set up an equation and we solve it. So here we set up a proportion and we use cross products to solve. Here we set up a one-step equation and use inverse operations to solve. Two different methods. Both of them will work. The first question that I have for you is, what is 54% of 100? And actually this one should be one that we just remember that when our whole is 100, it's just the percentage. 54% of 100 is 54. Just a good reminder for us. But let's jump into an example now where we actually have to use our percent proportion or our decimal method. What is 66% of 20? So 66% of 20. The percent proportion says percent, which is 66 over 100, equals part over our whole. Remember those key words are is and of, is over of. What is, we don't know our part. Our of, our whole is 20. And so I've got 66 over 100 equals P over 20. And then I'm going to use cross products to solve. So 66 times 20 equals 100 times P. 100 times P is 100P. 66 times 20, this is where I'm going to pull out my calculator. We are at this point allowed to use those. 66 times 20, and I get 1,320. And that's equal to 100P. Now I have a one-step equation where the inverse of multiplying by 100 is dividing by 100. And so I divide both sides by 100 and get P is equal to 13 2/10. 66% of 20 is 13 2/10. That seems reasonable and makes sense. Then we've got our decimal method. We've got 66%. What is, so we don't know what, so I'm going to put a W. Is means equals. 66% as a decimal is 0 and 6600, so I move that decimal 2 places to the right. And then of means multiply, so I multiply by 20. 66% of 20, I take my calculator and I punch in 6600 times 20, and when I do that I get 13 2/10. So my part here, or my what, is 66% of 20 is 13 2/10. So you can see that both methods got me the same answer. In both methods I got 13 2/10. I just used two different methods. Method one is percent proportion. Method two is the decimal method. And you really have some freedom here to choose what you want in terms of which method you want to use. So if I do another one, I'm going to erase my work here. If I say 32 is what percent of 40? 32 is what percent of 40? We don't know our percent in this case, so when I go to set up my percent proportion, my variable this time is no longer my part. We can have the variable be elsewhere, and so in this case it's my percent. So I'm going to put a P over 100 because we don't know our percent. What percent is what it's asking us, is equal to our part over our whole. 32 is, that's my part, 32. What percent of 40? 40 is my whole. Of is a keyword for my whole. So now I have P over 100 equals 32 over 40, and I'm going to use cross products to solve. I'm going to do 40 times P is 40P. 100 times 32 is 3,200. And then the inverse of multiplying by 40 on this side is dividing by 40 on both sides. So I'm going to do that. And when I do that, whoopsies, 3,200 divided by 40, I get 80. And so my part here, or my whole, my percentage, sorry, we're finding our percentage here, is 80. 32 is 80% of 40. Does that seem reasonable and make sense? It sure does. So this is where I add my percent sign and say, yeah, here's my percentage. The decimal method says 32 is, 32 equals, what percent, we don't know, of means multiply 40. And so I have 32 equals P times 40. The inverse of multiplying by 40 is dividing by 40. So I solve this one-step equation using inverse operations. When I punch in my calculator 32 divided by 40, I get 0.8 equals P. Now what we have to remember is that in our proportion, we get the percentage right outright. It's a whole number as a percentage. In our decimal method, we get the percent as a decimal, and we do have one more step at the end to convert this decimal to a percentage, which means we have to move this decimal 2 places to the right to get our 80%. So that's the big difference here in how the percentages are written. Remember that in the percent proportion, our percentage is written as a whole number. In our decimal method, our percent is written as a decimal, and so we have to convert it to a percent to get our final answer. And again, I double checked to make sure my answer makes sense. 32 is 80% of 40. Is that true? And it is, and so we're good to go. I'm going to do one more with you, and then I'm going to give you a chance to do just a couple on your own, just to make sure that you've got the concepts down here. 99 is 150% of what number? So the percent proportion says 150% over 100 equals, my part here is 99 over my whole, we don't know of what number. So here's my whole. I can use cross products to solve, and when I do 150 times W equals 99 times 100. And then the inverse of now I have a one-step equation. The inverse of multiplying by 150 is dividing both sides by 150. And when I do that, 9,900 divided by 150, I get my whole is 66. 99 is 150% of 66. That seems reasonable. 150% is bigger than 100. So that means that 99 has to be bigger than my original or my whole number. And it is. The decimal method says 99 is means equals, so I would say equals. 150% as a decimal is 1 5/10. I move that decimal 2 places to the right. And then of means multiply. What number we don't know, so here is my whole number that we don't know. And now I also have a one-step equation where I'm multiplying the variable by 1 5/10. The inverse of multiplying by 1 5/10 is dividing by 1 5/10. And when I do that, I can pull out my calculator. 99 divided by 1 5/10 is equal to 66. So my whole number here is 66. You may be asking yourself, well, Mr. Schaefer, last time we converted this into a percentage by moving the decimal, and this time you didn't. We have to be careful and know what they're asking us for. The last question did ask us for a percentage, and so that's why it mattered what we got as our answer. This one is asking us for the whole number. In both methods, the whole number is written as a whole number. It's not written as a decimal or something different. And so that's kind of the difference here between the two. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to kind of give you a chance to try just a few on your own and then check back with me. So you're going to do a little bit of pausing and restarting this video. And what I want you to do is I want you to pick one method. You definitely don't have to do both. I will show both, but I don't want you necessarily to do both. I just want you to pick one that makes most sense for you and just do a couple here on your own to make sure that you've got this concept. And if you have questions, then you can definitely stop and ask me or a friend. So, what is 140% of 35? I want you to pause and use a calculator, try this one on your own, and then unpause to see if you got it right. So you should be coming back from trying this on your own, and I'm just going to quickly sketch out the work here so that you can see. I've got 140 times 35. I divide both sides. And here I'm getting my part to be 49. Over here, what is 1.4 times 35? And I can use that information to also get my part as 49. So you should just be checking your work at this point. If you use the cross products, this is what your work should look like. If you use the decimal method, this is what your work should look like. And we know that our part, what is 140% of 35, is 49. I'm going to have you try one more, and then we'll be wrapped up with the whiteboard section of today's lesson. 24 is what percent of 80? So this one, again, I want you to pause, try it on your own, and then come back to see if you got it right. So at this point, you should be unpausing to see if you got this one right, and you can see my work here. I'm just sketching out in order so that you can see it. I'm getting my final answer as 30%, but let's double check with the other method. 24 is means equal, percent times 80. This is another one where my percent is written two different ways. In the percent proportion, you should have solved and got a percent as a whole number. In the decimal method, I have to take my decimal and make it into a percentage to get my final answer of 30%. And so you can see I get the same answer using both methods. It's just two different ways to get there depending on how your brain thinks. So at this point, we've done a little bit of a review in whiteboards. You had a chance to kind of try a couple on your own and review both methods. At this point, you should have picked a method that you like best to move forward with and continue practicing this skill of finding the percent, part, or whole given the other two values.